Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to introduce today Jeremy Firth, who is an Orthodox Christian and works as a data analyst, and he's on the West Coast. And I met Jeremy because I just popped into the Discord server to see what Paul Vanderklay was up to. And after Paul left, I talked a little bit to Jeremy, and he had some very interesting things to say. So we agreed to have a conversation today. And Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me.
I'm happy to be here. I've been following your work since it started. I think you started up right around the same time Paul did, and that's where I got interested in you, because I've always been a fan of Robert Pirsig. My father was a big fan of his work, and as a result, I became a big fan of Pirsig's work. So.
Okay, so I'd really, there's a couple of things I'd like to talk about with you. I'm interested in your journey into Orthodoxy, and I'm interested in your relationship to Pirsig, and maybe any crossover in there. So could you start maybe with how you became an Orthodox Christian? What did you convert from? You know, what's your relationship with established religion, or even spirituality, you could say?
Yeah, sure. Well, I grew up Mormon, actually, and was very active. I converted when I was 12. I think my phone, I didn't turn off my phone, I'm sorry. But I converted when I was 12 to Mormonism, and was a very active as a young man, and even went on a mission. I served as a missionary for the Mormon Church for 2 years, which was very difficult, but I don't regret it all. And then when I got back, I kind of was not super firm in the faith, but I did get married in the Mormon temple. I got married to another Mormon, and we were active, and then things just kind of started falling apart really quickly. I just had a hard time believing some of the, Jonathan has taught us to hate this word, but the literal truth claims. But what's funny is that they would use that word in some of their claims. Like they said, the Book of Mormon is the literal history of the Native American people, right? So I started having a really hard time with some of those claims, and then it just ended up kind of all falling apart, unraveling in my hands. And then, because I was not toying with, that's not fair to say. I was starting to learn martial arts and getting exposed to Taoism and Buddhism, and actually identified most with Taoism.
Yeah, so what led you to that? I mean, you were Mormon, a practicing Mormon.
Yeah, I watched The Matrix.
Ah.
To be honest with you, that movie was so mind-blowing to me that I was like, I want to learn martial arts now. And I found a local teacher who was there was a grandmaster, and then my local teacher. So he was a personal student of the grandmaster of the art I was studying. And so it was very authentic, and it was very taught in a very traditional way. And that really appealed to me. And what I learned quickly was that all kinds of things start changing in your mind and then your worldview as you start participating in a traditional practice, right? And I didn't really grasp the full implications of that, and I don't think you ever can, but it definitely started changing how I saw the world.
Was it because it's an embodied practice rather than a more ritualistic, or let's just say more text-oriented practice?
Was what? The Mormonism?
No, the Taoism.
Yeah. Well, the Taoism was definitely, there were physical exercises you were doing to cultivate the Tao.
I guess I mean martial arts in terms of the Tao.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Martial arts was definitely, martial arts is just a way of participating in a traditional worldview embodied. It's not, there are obviously some martial arts that are very effective for teaching you how to defend yourself, but that's not the main purpose, or at least it doesn't seem to be. It's more of a practice of learning discipline, learning hierarchy, learning to understand hierarchy, participating in a hierarchy, participating in a tradition, and learning mastery over your body, learning, it's an ascetic practice where you're suffering for something to learn an art,
Yeah.
and I think it's just like a traditional apprenticeship, and that definitely, Mormonism has its symbolism and it has its rituals, but they're very, let's just say, like, they've been gutted as far as the understanding of that symbolic structure goes. I don't think most Mormons, or at least I didn't, I can't speak for most Mormons, but I couldn't find a source for people who could help me understand the underlying relationships in a lot of the symbolism of Mormonism. And it's not like on a daily basis, like with Taoism, there are exercises you do to
Sure.
cultivate the Tao, right? And in martial arts, with Mormonism, it's more propositional,
Yeah.
with scripture reading, and which they largely they ignore, like, the majority corpus of the history of Christian literature. Like, they just say that everything, like, after the apostles died, the world, like, the Christianity fell into apostasy, and then Joseph Smith restored it in 1830.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that happened in between that, they're just like, that's not Christianity.
Right. So Joseph Smith was the great prophet. Do they consider him
Yeah.
the Messiah?
No, they don't consider him a Messiah, but they definitely see his role as being pivotal, key, it's close to the Messiah, but
Like
not in the actual
revivifying the
sense.
word of Christ, let's just say.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were so from age 12 to what age were you a Mormon?
About 25.
Okay. And then did you convert to Orthodoxy then, or did
Oh,
you?
no.
Okay. So what is your journey after that?
Well, I fell out of the church, and I actually left my wife at the same time.
Well, you must have gotten married very young.
Well, yeah, that's,
Yeah.
well, not in Mormon culture. It's normal for Mormon culture. I got married when I was 22.
Mm-hmm.
And then close to 23. But then I was married for about 2.5 years, and then I was divorced. So that just threw everything upside down.
Was that the main, I mean, I don't want to go too much into your personal life, but was the just you losing your faith the main reason that you two couldn't see eye to eye anymore?
Well, to be honest, I think she wanted to reconcile, and I saw her as part of the package of Mormonism, right? Because I felt like it wasn't fair of me to expect her to stay in a relationship when I had no interest in doing what I had pledged to do as her husband, which was be part of that body, so it was more like she was willing to, but I didn't feel like that was fair, and I didn't want to raise children in that environment.
That's right. And that probably would have been a big sticking point when that happened, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because I was becoming very disaffected with it. And so I didn't want to put that kind of pressure on kids. I just didn't think that was healthy.
Okay, so you've seen The Matrix. It's totally blown your mind. You're living some kind of spiritual quest through the truth that you've perceived in this movie. So what happens next?
Well, I went through a stage of, like, New Age mysticism. There was a small group of practicing Taoists where I was living at the time, and I was meeting with them and talking with them, and practicing with them, but I didn't ever feel settled in there. And then the new atheist movement came out, and the God delusion with Dawkins, and I got roped into that. And I was just, because I had grown up with this framework, and they say, oh, this is the way it is, and then you get exposed and say, oh, maybe it's not. I became very skeptical of anything or any claim to metaphysical awareness or metaphysical claims. And then Dawkins came along right at that time where I was in that struggle, and he was like, yeah, don't buy any of that nonsense.
So
Right.
would you say that you know, because in this corner we've often talked about how the new atheists are just the flip side of, you know, fundamentalist Christianity, that it's a
Yes.
materialist point of view. It just happens to be the one without God. There's one with
Yes.
and one without. Do you feel like when you turned over to when you turned to the new atheists, that was that kind of dynamic happening with you? That's like the best thing I can do to totally get rid of this is do this opposite thing.
Yes.
At least it
Yes,
might
for
have
sure.
felt like at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Where it was just like, oh, okay, now I have people who are talking sense here, right? So, and I wasn't aware of dialectics at the time, and I wasn't really like I wasn't a very good student. You know, I read voraciously. I'm an insatiably curious person, but I've never fit well into structured cultures. Well, until becoming Orthodox, but I like school just was never. So my exposure to, in other words, my exposure to philosophy or being able to manage the tools of this kind of discussion or this kind of worldview, I didn't really have a firm foundation in. So I was led by the persuasive writing of Richard Dawkins, and you know, considered myself logical and rational, and they used all of that
Mhm.
to really kind of propagandize, and it appealed, you know. And then I was a Sam Harris fan, and then but I started seeing some of the problems with Sam Harris. Like the moral landscape just didn't make any sense to me. I was like, how can you be a naturalist and argue that morality is self-evident at the same time? Like that,
Mhm.
that's absurd. That makes no sense whatsoever. Like, how can you make any moral claim in a naturalist environment, right? Like, where if you believe that everything is deterministic
Yeah.
and purely materialistic, that just makes no sense. And and then I started going through some major life personal issues with my family where things just started falling apart, completely unraveling. And and that was when Jordan Peterson came into my life, right? And he started talking about the Bible.
And we're looking at like 2015 around then.
Yeah, yeah, right when he
Yeah.
started coming on the scene.
Yeah.
Like I saw the like his first video about talking about free speech and the pronouns in Canada, that controversy that showed up in my feed, and I was
Yeah.
like, who's this guy,
Yeah.
right? And then he started doing the Bible debates, not or the Bible lectures, not long after that, and I had never heard anyone talk about the Bible that way.
It was remarkable to hear that, wasn't it?
Yeah, like the whole thing where he was just like, look, the history part of the
Mhm.
Bible, I'm just going to set that aside. I'm
Yeah.
not going to address that. I'm going to address this from a, you know, our most current understanding of cognitive science and show you how relevant it is. And I was like, what? Like this broke down the doors of my materialism, you know, and to hear him speaking that way, going along with a personal life crisis, it was like, man, what do I have to lose? You know, what, like, why not learn more about? I want to find some church that talks about the Bible this way or understands it this way, because it just made so much more sense to me than just arguing over like the archaeology of the Bible. You
Sure.
know, like that drives me crazy.
Yeah, you mean
So
like that Bart Ehrman stuff, the
yeah,
film?
no, that's just like, I think it's just a real waste of time. And it's a complete misunderstanding
Mhm.
of the traditional mindset, you know, the traditional worldview. Like, did James really write the book of James? Right? Like, what is it? Really, what is the usefulness of that discussion? Does it matter? It fits into a framework
Right.
that helps you make sense of the world. It's not, it's making ontological claims of truth. It's not trying to say anything about that kind of stuff, right? It's like, so anyway, yeah, when I heard Jordan, you know, it was like the whole, and I
Mhm.
don't want to get into creation science at all, but that whole argument is just like, to me, it seems really pointless. It's just like, why do you need to the Bible's not trying to make scientific claims. I do believe it's historical, but I believe that our understanding of history is very different than a traditional worldview of history. And I have no problem with that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that is certainly what the Pageaus are saying is it's a different type of consciousness in a different context of,
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it served a different
pre-enlightenment, I
purpose.
suppose. Hmm?
Yeah, they weren't trying. It served a different purpose. They
Yeah,
weren't trying to make journalistic claims of
yeah.
what scientifically happened. That's just not what they're trying to do. They're creating a narrative that you can be a part of. You can
So
participate.
I've always been very interested in this book. I just want to segue a little, and then I want to go back to your
Sure.
journey. I've always been very interested in this book, the Bicameral Mind by Julian James, The
Yeah.
Origin of Consciousness and the Bicameral Mind. It's a very interesting book because I think it fits in a lot with a lot of the Pageaus talk about the medieval consciousness, and what you're talking about is a different, different way of understanding reality, let's say, before the materialist understanding. And it's a really interesting book. It makes that claim that God spoke to us as if we were schizophrenics,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that is a little bit material. I mean, it's a materialistic understanding of, how the hierarchy came down through us, as if through voices, as if we were schizophrenics, and there's an area in the brain that is atrophied, that Jane said, he's long dead, but that said that it's like the antenna for that voice, which is the voice of the community, and the voice of the hierarchy, basically. And even though it has like a materialistic premise, when you don't look at it in a materialistic way, it kind of gives a sense of how perception and understanding and consciousness might have felt at that time versus today.
Yeah.
So I've been, I mean, I'm not, it's hard to say, and it's really hard to, you can't go back and figure out, you really can't, but you have a sensibility that the way we were conscious was quite different at a different time.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think we can get a couple of hints back into that. One is, in Orthodoxy, there's a specific way that they talk about that. They call it the nous, right? So they don't.
Yeah.
They think you have three parts. You have mind, soul, body. I'm not using the proper. Anyway, they see the nous as a part of your makeup.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got your nous is part of your soul, basically. But they say that most people's nous, and it's spelled N-O-U-S, by the way. That took me a little bit to find when I first started hearing that word. I'm like, what is a nous, right? Like, what?
You're going to be roped into this.
Yeah, right. Wait a minute. So nous ties in, it is understood as the part of your being that perceives divinity, that perceives God. And most people's nous is very darkened, right? It's cloudy, it's muddy, it's rusted, it's corrupted, and it's incapable of recognizing it. And you need guidance in how to clear your nous, and how to and then it starts working in startling ways. and the whole ascetic life and the liturgical life of the Orthodox Church is there to help you heal your nous, which allows you to perceive the divine.
So so you would say that it's like strengthening your nous and clearing the blocks at the same time, so that the nous and the divine are let's just say expressions of the same thing, or your nous is an expression of the divine, and it's to strengthen or clarify or line up, let's just say, like the divine and your nous, so that they are one and the same.
Yeah, that is the ultimate goal of Orthodoxy, of Christianity, is theosis, right? God became man so that man could become God, right? But we believe that that's an eternal, like, that you'll always be trying to come closer, and that there's eternity ways to come closer to an understanding or to a communion with God. Right?
You can certainly see the Neoplatonic influences when you describe it that way.
Yeah, there's definitely some interplay, right? So in the Orthodox, in Constantinople, they had statues of Plato and Aristotle in the narthex of the church, right? So in the entryway, which is the area where the catechumens would witness the liturgy, the divine liturgy, there Plato and Aristotle were there.
Wow.
In statue form. And then when you went into the sanctuary, it was just the saints, right? It was just the icons of the saints. But they definitely saw the role that the Greek philosophers played in setting the stage for Christianity and for Christ to come and say, the Logos is not a concept, the Logos is a person, right? And that is the claim that sets apart Christianity. That's the claim that sets apart Christianity from all other philosophy and all other science. Like science looks for the truth as a what, because they think that they're going to gain mastery over the world by discovering this what, right? You see this with Stephen Wolfram right now. He's on this huge quest. And the saints say, I'm reading a book about Saint Silouan, the Athonite, and in there he says all of these pursuits of humanity to understand the truth as a what will end up in pantheism, because they don't understand, because they're looking in the wrong place.
Right. It's a continual fragmentation.
Yes. Yeah. You're just gonna see God everywhere.
Yeah.
You're gonna see God. You're gonna see the immanent. You're gonna see the transcendent God.
Yeah.
But you're never gonna have access to the immanent God.
So you're going to think that your discovery, that your discrete discovery is it, and then there'll be the next it, and then the next it, and it. I mean, this is like quantum physics. They can't. Quantum physics can't. There's something wrong with it, so they have to keep inventing more particles.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's infinite, right? It keeps going down. It doesn't. There's no end to that. It's just that our telescopes and our microscopes get better. That's it, right? And then they say, oh, well, now we've found it, right? It's like it was the same thing. They would use this in Soviet prisons to torment the Orthodox believers. They would say, hey, we've been to space. God's not up there. Right? He's not there, just to let you know. And these believers were just like, what are you talking about? You're talking on two different levels, right? And totally. The contemplation of that the human imagination has access to, no matter how good our tools get, never has access to the divine essence, and doesn't have access to the idea that truth, capital T truth, is a who. It's a person that you can have a relationship with. Yeah. Right. That's a revealed truth.
That's very interesting. That has so many, I mean, even the way you describe it, that just blows, that makes me think of so many things in terms of what has been discussed in terms of truth. Like even when you talk about pragmatic truth, the William James pragmatic truth, how it updates is like a fractal of that in a way.
Yeah. That's the thing, right? So like, I need to fix my curtains here. Sorry, the sun was getting in my eyes. Pirsig was stumbling into this with the static and the dynamic quality, right? And I have some disagreements with like how he structured his ontological hierarchy, with intellectual being the top. I just don't see it that way. But the static and dynamic quality are unified in Christ. He is the divine essence. He participates in the Trinity for eternity, from eternity, as the only begotten Son of the Father. And he incarnated into time and space as a person and said, this is Logos, right? John John chapter 1 verse, John chapter 1 is what converted me to Christianity.
Okay, so tell me. Okay, so
Back to
let's yeah,
Christianity, I
let's
should say.
yeah, let's go back into your journey. So
Yeah.
all right, so tell me about this. How you how you read that and what it did for you and how you ended up being Orthodox.
Okay.
Okay, so this is
So
like 2016 or so, and Jordan
yeah,
Peterson is
yeah,
piquing your interest in a different way of thinking,
yes.
as he has for
So
many of us, as most of us in this corner. Somehow, our interest was, we were guided by what he was saying.
yeah, he's definitely in my prayers every day. I pray for him, and I'm so grateful. I'm grateful. I'm trying not to break it down. I'm so grateful for what he did,
Yeah.
and I know he's paid an enormous, dear, personal price for his bravery and his courage in facing these difficult questions. So
yeah, well,
I just want to say that. But
and he's but the good news is he's better.
yeah, and he's continuing. He hasn't given up. He's not done.
I'm seeing him on Tuesday.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. So I started hearing his stuff, and then I started going, wow, this is, I gotta, and Jonathan Pajot was right there too.
Sure, yeah.
Metaphysics of Pepe. I was into Pepe because of my political interests at that time, and so I was like, wow, this is really interesting that somebody can make sense. Somebody can speak in a symbolic way about like what Pepe is actually doing. This is really interesting. So I got interested in Pajot and his video about obviously Santa Claus exists. Like I watched that probably 15 or 20 times trying to understand what he was talking about. And then it finally started clicking, right? It finally was like, I actually called Paul Vanderklay at that time. Because he's like, hey, I'm a preacher and I'm here, and he wasn't as popular then. He didn't have as much going on, and
he had just started that whole Jordan Peterson inquiry.
Yeah, and glory to God, he answered the phone.
That's so nice. Yeah.
And we talked for like half an hour because I was going through a crisis of meaning and of like my framework for understanding the world through materialism was falling apart, and I felt crazy. Like I was just like, this is, what do I hold on to? Because I was starting to understand what that Santa Claus exists and what that means and how to understand that. Like I was starting to understand that physics are a subset of metaphysics, and that we can't understand physics without having a metaphysical worldview. But at that time I didn't know I had a metaphysical freedom, right? I didn't know what metaphysics was. And so he was very patient with me, and we talked, and he was just like, you're not crazy. This is fine. Just be patient. Like, don't rush anything.
Wait for God to speak to you, in other words.
Yeah. Just be curious, but don't be impatient and don't be hasty, right? It's like that old Latin phrase. I don't know how to say it in Latin, but it means, make haste slowly. That's kind of the advice that he gave me, not in so many words. So then I was like, well, I got to go to an Orthodox church, right? So because this is the only people I've found who talk like this.
Yeah.
With Jonathan, he kind of opened that door with iconography. Like I read the first Orthodox book I read was The Meaning of Icons by Losky, it's this huge book, and it's like this thick. It's this like 14 by 14 book of these huge icons, and he's laying out. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful book, and I was just captivated. So I went to the local Orthodox church, and I had started going.
So there was one by you that you could go to.
Yeah,
fairly
yeah. It was a Greek Orthodox church, like 20 minutes away, and I started going to the catechumen classes and meeting with the priests.
And that's what I'd like to know. So you decided you potentially wanted to convert, or you decided for sure and you were just going to do it, or were you exploring? Or
no, I hadn't decided yet, because I also had been telling my family for the last 15 years that God was a joke, and it was a big sham, and that they were being taken advantage of, and I was going to tell them the way. I had, so there was a lot of humble pie I had to eat to adopt that worldview again, you know. And it's not, and I can't say again, because the Christianity that I was exposed to in Orthodoxy was nothing like the Christianity I was exposed to in Mormonism, you know, or the understanding of it anyways.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it took a while, but thankfully my family and friends have all been very supportive.
That's wonderful.
I haven't faced any. I mean, it put a little bit of pressure on a couple of my relationships, but I've found that the best way through that is to just keep talking to them, and to keep like being available, and
be patient,
and try to be as genuine as I can.
Yeah, and that's another situation where you're patient and let them, you know.
Yeah.
And let them figure it out that this is a true thing for you.
Yeah.
So,
and once I started getting some of the framework for understanding metaphysics, and then understanding Aristotle and Plato, I did a lot of reading on that and studying. And then when it came together was when I understood John chapter 1, that I understood what logos was through Aristotle and Plato. And then when John says Christ is the logos, I was like, okay, done, we're in. And that was it, really. That was it. Once it clicked, I was done. Like there was no way I wasn't going to be Orthodox Christian.
So you had a conversion moment. It's great that you had a conversion moment with the archetype of conversion, John.
Yeah. Well, it is still, it's both, right? That's another phrase that comes up in Orthodoxy a lot. It's both and, right? Instead of, is it this or this? If you ask a priest that, is it this or this? 99% of the time, the priest is going to say, it's both and. And that's the way it is with conversion, right? It was a process of learning and understanding, and there is an aha moment where I was hooked, like Christ had the lure out, you know, and he was reeling, and I was like, okay, and then there's that moment where you grab the hook and he sets it.
Yeah, because you're talking about the mystical experience in terms of cultivating it and then having it, and both are two sides. Let's just say one is more regimented, let's just say more static, and one is dynamic, the dynamic insight.
Yeah, it's very much like photography or like fishing. It's related.
Good one.
Where photography is photography is you're going out, and fishing too. You're going out, but I'll just stick with one. I won't keep jumping between metaphors. But if you go out for photography, you go to a place and you go, okay, this is a beautiful place, but the lighting's all wrong, right? This isn't, like, if you go out at noon, there's really not many places that look nice at noon, right? I mean, they can look stunning as far as like the view. Oh, wow, I can see far. But compared to sunrise or sunset, that's different, right? But even then, if you're sitting there and you go, okay, I know this spot's going to be good and I'm going to sit here, but then it comes down and there's a plane flying across, and so there's a big contrail and there's birds, or naughty birds, that's a bad example, but there's a power line, and then it's cloudy and you can't even see the sunset. You were there, you were ready, but not everything comes together, you know. But those photography moments those photographs that we pay money for to hang in our house, is a photographer who went out to the same place 50 times, and that one time everything came together, and that's what we see as beauty, right? And for me, that is really explains the practice of Orthodoxy, the liturgical life, really well, where you're putting yourself in that environment, in that you're creating the opportunity, you're trying to still yourself and quiet yourself enough for God to speak to you. And you never know when that's going to happen, but these little sparks start showing up, and then they start showing up outside your prayer life as well. You start hearing things that just go ding, and you start seeing things that come together and go ding, and you start, you know, someone mentioned this to me. They said, when you go into an Orthodox church, for about a year, you're going to keep seeing new things. You're going to keep seeing things you've never seen before. You're going to start noticing details in the environment that you've never noticed before, that are there, that are all part of the environment, right? There's just so much to take in at first, that these small details start arising
Could
that
you
you
give
start
me
noticing, and
Could you
it
give
ties
me
in.
an example of that so we can understand it a little bit better? Like, give me what something, I mean, I hate to make you pin it down to something,
Oh,
so,
no.
so cut and dry, but it just would be useful to understand the Orthodox experience, because I think so many people are interested in the Orthodox experience now.
Yeah. Okay. So a good example is you go in, there's all the icons, there's the iconostasis, and there's all the symbolism, and there's crosses, and you'll start seeing crosses in more places, right? That's what happened to me. I started seeing, oh, there's cross, oh, there's a cross, oh, there's a cross, oh, there's a cross. And then you start counting, you're just looking up at because there's an icon of Christ on the ceiling, and he's the kingdom of the king of the heavens. And you just notice the chandelier, and you're like, oh, there's crosses there. Oh, how many candles are there? Oh, there's 40 on this level, and then there's 12. Oh, someone thought about that, right? It's like these little things, these little ties start coming out, and you start, as you pursue it, it reveals itself, right? And so then the other one example I'll give you, there's Christ and Theotokos, Mary, the Theotokos, are the two main icons that are by the royal doors.
Can you say that word again?
Oh, Theotokos.
And
so that means like the birth house of God, like the house of God who gave birth to God.
Oh, okay. So like the
Theotokos.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I get it.
Mary, yeah. That's the Greek word that they've kept because it doesn't translate well into English. So they just use Theotokos to talk about Mary. So there's two icons of them, and you notice the icons, and there's a lot of symbolism in the icons, but one really, really compelling aspect, one principle in the icons of Christ and Theotokos is that Christ has a red tunic and a blue, I'm sorry, let me make sure I get this right. Yeah, and a blue robe, and Mary has a blue tunic and a red robe. So they're the same but inverted.
Yeah,
right?
Inverted. Yeah.
Well, so then that's something you notice along the way, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what that means. And you just, it's just one of those things. Sometimes you ask, sometimes you don't. But eventually the answer came along, and it was that the red symbolizes humanity and the blue symbolizes divinity. So you have Christ, who is by nature divine, takes on the human nature, and Theotokos, who's by nature human, takes on the divine nature, right? So it's like these threads all start tying together, and you just start seeing more and more. You'll start seeing icons in places you didn't know there were icons in the church, right? You'll look up in one little corner, and you're like, oh, that's an icon of, oh, it's like it's just what happens. That's what happened to me, and it's a common experience.
So you must have been really overwhelmed by the beauty the first time you were, before even some of these associative experiences occurred. Just the beauty must have been overwhelming.
Yes, yeah. It's very deliberate to put you into a different place mentally and physically, right? When you walk into an Orthodox church, there's the incense, there's the icons. You walk into a small, darkened place like the narthex that leads you forward, like almost draws you in to, then it opens up into the nave, the church, the sanctuary, and that's where you see all the saints and the archangels and Christ and Theotokos all celebrating divine liturgy with you. You're stepping out of time and space. You're stepping into an eternal place. That where liturgy is always being celebrated, right? And you're participating in that.
So the church itself is sort of like a dynamic space where, like I like what you say, where the pattern is just continually sparked. The pattern is ongoing for eternity.
Yes. Yeah. So so we follow the liturgical calendar. So it has, the feast days for the different saints and different celebrations and celebrations from the life of Christ, and recognizing these major elements of Christ's life. And some of those change which day of the week they're on. Some stay, they're on the same date every week or every year. Some change, like Pascha, which is Easter, changes year to year. So even that, like the calendar itself is static and dynamic. It has a static and dynamic quality to it, right? Where you're seeing the same patterns, but they manifest a little differently as you're moving through them in time, right? And that in itself keeps the church vital, right? It's an ancient faith that's it's an ancient faith that's eternally relevant.
That's continually renewing itself.
Yes,
it stays in harmony, let's say, because that's kind of like that you could look at that through a Taoist lens. Like that is the point of Taoism, is exactly that.
There's exactly where Taoism, well, I won't go too far down that road, but there's definitely a lot of parallels. And we would say that Taoism is it's a precursor it's a precursor of truth that led to truth being revealed in the person of Christ.
I think that makes sense, because you look back at the early monastic traditions, being something like Taoism and something like well, let's just say Plotinus sort of integrated all of these monastic traditions, and that the Neoplatonism integrated these traditions. So there's a lineage not just from the Greeks, but from Eastern monastic, East monastic traditions as well, that somehow lay the foundation. I think that's accurate to say.
Well, I would say how would I put it? They're definitely related, but this ties into Jonathan's kind of symbolism of the truth has always, well, let's say the monastics have always drifted out to the edges of, like in the early days of the Christian church, those who wanted to live a more ascetic life and not be distracted by worldliness and wanted to focus more on their prayer life lived outside the city. And Saint Anthony the Great is credited as the one who developed and who basically instantiated the monastic tradition in Christianity. And because he went outside and he started talking to all those guys, around the edges of the city, and he was like, well, I'm not finding what I need here, so I'm just going to go out in the wilderness, right? But he obviously wasn't the first one. I mean, Christ did the same thing in his life, right?
Getting the actual experience, let's say.
You have to
experience of that the one, you could say.
The purification. It's a purification process where you're going out and being purified in the wilderness. Right?
That makes sense.
You're doing spiritual warfare out there. You're on the borders of your ability to survive, right? You're completely dependent on God.
So you how long did it take you? So you went to the what did you call them, catechumen?
The catechumen classes. Catechumen just means one who's learning. It's like once you decide to join the church, you become a catechumen, and they say a prayer for you, and then you become a catechumen, and then it's a process of about typically around a year, but it totally depends on your priest, on learning the basics of the church and participating in the church. So that's you actively going to church as much as you can.
Sure.
And would that praying personally
more than once a week then?
If you can. It depends on how far away you live from church. Sure. I mean, that's all between you and your priest.
But you were guided. The priest, did you find that you had good support and guidance in the church? That
yes, and part of this was hard, and it was kind of delayed because of the whole
COVID?
medical emergency that sprung out around the world. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because of COVID,
Yeah.
it kind of threw a monkey wrench in everything. And I ended up where I started my journey. The parish where I started my journey isn't where I ended up.
Yeah.
I was going to a Greek Orthodox church, and then I switched over to an Antiochian Orthodox church that's a little farther away from me, but they reopened earlier.
Oh, yeah. So you went
And
to the one you could actually
so
attend.
yeah, I went to the
Yeah.
one I could participate in, and I found a home.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah,
important.
yeah. In Orthodoxy, yeah, the
Yeah.
Facebook church just makes zero sense.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you. Okay, so let's move a little bit because tell me about your relationship with Pirsig. It started with your dad, right? So we want to integrate that into what we've talked about and what we're,
Sure.
going a little bit more into the Peugeots too.
Yeah, so that's my father right there. He passed away.
It looks like he's playing an instrument.
He's playing a guitar in that picture.
No.
Yeah. So yeah, he passed a couple of years ago, but we were very close.
Sorry.
And thank you.
Yeah,
I still miss him.
I'm sure
yeah,
you
I
do.
still
Get
miss
it.
him
I get it. Believe me.
So, but I pray for him every day, and that helps me stay connected. It's very nice. So, anyway, that sounded trite, and I didn't mean it that way at all.
It didn't.
It helps a lot to be able to pray and feel that your prayers are efficacious.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, he was a huge fan of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance because he was a motorcycle rider. My dad was a biker, and he was the classic libertarian biker that popped up in the 70s. That group of people who we just want to be left alone. We just want to do our
they
thing.
weren't exactly the biker gang, but
no,
they took some, let's say they were influenced by that culture to some extent.
Yeah, they weren't interested in directly like subverting the government or confronting it. They just wanted to be left alone.
Yeah.
They just wanted to do what they wanted to do without being hassled. So like he marched again at the state capitol against helmet laws. Like
I was just going to say, I bet your dad was against helmet law.
yeah, exactly. Right. Like I should be free to be stupid. Right? Like the government, like he had a big problem with nanny state and with safety, and that safety should be imposed by the hierarchy.
Yeah, safety.
He was definitely anti-authoritarian. My dad was like he was anti-authority, but at the same time, didn't want to like revolutionize it either. He didn't want to overthrow it. He just didn't want it to be tyrannical.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what got him into Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. He read a lot of books, and in that sphere, that book made the rounds, and he read it and really enjoyed it. And then as I became a teenager, he was like, "Hey, you should read this book." So I read it, and then we actually read a part of it in my high school English class. We read the section on gumption traps.
Oh yeah,
which is really still very relevant.
Yeah, that's the most practically useful part of the book. I refer to it all the time because those just about everything you need. That's, I don't want to, but be that reductionistic, but it sure is a way to solve a lot of problems if you have questions about how to live. Yeah,
well, and it actually touches on a few things that we've talked about in this conversation, where it talks about, if you run into a trap, like if you're looking, you can't, sometimes looking prevents you from seeing, right? So when you've got if you're looking for something, you can't see what is, right? And like you'll have that experience where you're looking for your keys. Where are my keys? Where are my keys? And then you can't find them. You're looking in absurd places. You can't find them. And then you just sit down and you're like, okay, I can't find my keys. And you like pick up a book, and then you put down the book and you look, and there's the keys. Right? It's like, it's that idea that happens to you when you're facing a problem, right? So he talks about that when you're trying to fix a motorcycle.
Yeah.
And how, if you are stuck on one particular explanation for why something might be going wrong, it may close your mind to seeing other possibilities and other reasons that may also be causing that problem. And so he's like, a lot of times the trick is to just go away, get a cup of coffee,
Yeah, that's right.
go do something different, and then come back. And he said, and sometimes the period of needing to step away and come back is a period of weeks or months, you know. And I would say, in my own experience with religion, sometimes it's years or
Yeah,
decades,
yeah.
right? Where you're looking at one thing and you're trying to impose
Yeah.
your particular explanation, and then you come back and all of these other little things you hadn't noticed before start entering the picture.
Yeah, so kind of like the advice that Paul gave you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Just like be patient and
Mhm.
let this happen as a process,
Mhm.
right? And you're gonna start to see things clearly again. Things are gonna start making sense again. It's gonna come back together. But I understand why you feel distraught right now. So yeah. So that ties into Pirsig a lot. And so as I was reading Pirsig, and he was talking about, you know, quality and metaphysics, and I didn't really have a good understanding of what metaphysics was when I read the book, and I've read it several times.
You've
And I've
read both of them now, I guess, right?
yeah, I
Yeah.
have. And it was interesting because, like, I had talked to a lot of people who had read Zen.
Yeah.
Either they had been assigned it or they had read it on their own. I had never talked to anyone who had read Leela.
Mhm. Mhm.
Until you started doing your project. I'm like, oh, someone else is going to talk about Leela finally, right? So because I felt like that was a good, it was the next step in
Mhm.
his understanding of ontology, and that you know, I don't agree with, I do agree that let's say, I definitely see the value in the dynamic quality and the static quality. And definitely that manifests itself in the Orthodox understanding of the world, where you have, the way the Orthodox describe it is the divine essence
Uh-huh.
and the divine energies. So the divine essence is God, unknowable,
Yeah.
incomprehensible,
Yeah.
above all, outside of all time,
Mhm.
time and
Mhm.
space, outside of all
Yeah.
categories,
Yeah. Yeah.
but more real than anything we can comprehend.
Mhm.
But we can participate
Yeah.
in the person of God through his energies, through
Yeah.
his
Through his
works.
expression, through his attributes.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's the Orthodox way of understanding
Yeah.
a static and a dynamic
Yeah.
quality.
No, that
There's the
makes a lot of
static quality of God that's never subject, and that we will never understand because it's uncreated. And we can only understand him through his energies
Mhm.
because we're created.
Yeah.
You know, we're a subset of what he is, and that will for eternity be the case.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's kind of, but anyway, yeah, Pirsig, it gave me a structure, and it helped me understand, like I did like his classical romantic
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah, I like that. I mean,
way of
he, you
looking.
know, he ditched that, but I still, I mean, that's a still very useful way, at least, you know, certainly it's a useful way to see people's inclinations, people's
Yeah.
temperaments for one.
Yeah, exactly. Those people who are drawn to trying to understand why things are the way they are, and people who only want to experience them as they are, with no interest in understanding why that might be the case, right? And actually see that as like an invasion, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
why is this painting so beautiful? They go, don't ask that question. It does. It is. It just is, right? And I didn't understand. Like, I had a hard time relating to those kind of people for much of my life, you know. And that book kind of helped me
Yeah.
understand that, and understand things from their point of view more.
Yeah,
Kind
I think that that's very true. That's very useful. You know, on that level, kind of like the John Haidt book, you know, that says these aren't your enemies. They just, you know, they have different. They're either, you know, what, depending on which side you are, the temperament is towards fairness above all else, or an equal smattering of all six moral. I forget what they're called.
yeah,
Yeah, so it's
yeah,
that kind of thing where when it you know, it demystifies the difference between you and the other in terms of temperament, and makes you a little bit more compassionate. And I think the, you know, classic romantic does that for sure.
yeah. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Both of those are useful models as far as they go, right? Like as far
as far
as
as they go, as far as
yeah,
like,
yeah,
social, let's just say social tools.
yes, exactly,
Yeah.
right, yeah. It's like a framework for understanding people around you that seem to be a bizarre mystery at first.
So you have, so in terms of your view now, let's just say, as a practicing Orthodox Christian, there are things in Pirsig, metaphysics of quality, that you agree with, and there are things you don't agree with. Can you tell me a little bit about both?
Yeah, well, I think I've mentioned like the static and dynamic quality. I definitely
Yeah, you definitely,
agree with,
so
and
that fits right in. Okay, so
yeah, and
but
I think you can. I want to tie that really quick. I want
yeah,
to tie that to the cross, right? So
yeah,
the cross, the vertical aspect of the cross is your relationship with God,
yeah,
and the horizontal is your relationship with your fellow man, right?
sure,
The two
sure.
great commandments, and I think you can see that the static, you know, you're how do I say this? You learn to relate to God in both elements, right?
Mhm.
And you learn to see God in the static and in the dynamic, right? So it's you have these eternal principles that play out in dynamic time,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's a useful way to see things. I think that um, and you know, frequently in the saints and the church fathers you hear, and you see it in the Old Testament where it talks about walk this path, like God tells Israel, walk on this path back into the kingdom, and don't go to the left and don't go to the right. And it's the path of balance, right? It's like
Right.
you can get out of balance either way. You can have too much light and too much heaven
Yeah,
and not enough earth, or you can have too much earth and not enough heaven.
absolutely.
And to me, that is another way of speaking about the static dynamic
Mhm.
kind of quality, you know, like where you can have too much of the masculine and too much of the feminine, you know, is another way of saying this, a similar thing.
But if you're oriented in the right way, let's say, Peugeot would say you're oriented towards God, and maybe
Yeah,
Person would say oriented towards quality. If you, and all the time you're, the gumption trap, the gumption chautauqua, is a lesser variation, let's say, of the divine liturgy. There's something in that, there's a ritualistic, there's a revivifying ritualism in these things that clear your path towards the highest good. Just like the
yeah,
gumption trap is, the gumption itself, he says, is the psychic gasoline towards the good. And
mm.
you're saying in the Orthodox Church, these rituals and the liturgy. I mean, I'm sorry if I'm using these
No,
words
no, go ahead.
incorrectly.
No, no.
Clear clear the blocks to your nous, connecting with the divine.
Yes, I
So
would say
there's
that. And
something very similar in that.
yeah, and I would say it ties in as well in that it allows for the irrational, and it allows for the tiredness of being human, the weakness of
Yeah,
being human, right? So we have fasting periods,
yeah,
we have periods where we're not fasting at
yeah.
all, and then we have periods where, and we have, you know, you're not at church all the time, right?
Right, exactly.
You can't live that way. You're not and even monks aren't in church all the time. Monks
Well,
pray, monks work, monks go to church.
yeah.
You know, they have all three of those things. It's not, they don't hyper focus on one area of being human.
Well, that's interesting, because I really like this. Really stuck out to me in Matthew Pajot's book, chapter 49,
Mm,
and this is the Sabbath as a balance of time and space.
mm.
So time, of course, is the flooding, the where meaning and matter don't line up, where we're confusion, and you have space, which is regimented, rational. It would be the square, kind of like dynamic and static, you could say. I mean, I don't want to
Yes.
go into some kind of analysis where 100% say that they're
Yeah,
parallel.
it doesn't
I'm not,
map perfectly, but it's
yeah,
still, yeah.
but what he says, like what you're saying, is so the revivifying Sabbath is how you balance it, so you don't become too static or too dynamic.
Yes.
You allow the rest to reorient. For example, like space is going to have to be updated. The static patterns have to be updated with dynamic quality. Let's say, again, I'm something like there's a dynamism in this chaos.
Yeah.
That if you let it in, that if you rest, that if you allow yourself to wander around the periphery, you could say, or something like that, then this can be updated and always stay relevant.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that mapping perfectly. I mean, it is, and your understanding of it is similar to mine, as far as there is a restorative aspect that comes from going and standing in church for 2 hours, and then that's played out in other forms. Like, obviously there's nothing that compares to partaking of the Eucharist. And liturgy is all there to prepare you for the Eucharist.
Yeah.
And the prayers, the Vesper prayers on Saturday night, are there to prepare you for liturgy.
Yeah.
And the prayers that you said at noon on Saturday are to prepare you for Vespers. It's like, it's all, you're stepping into it and you're stepping out of it. You're stepping into and out of constantly. And as you do that more and become more cognizant of it and more aware of it, it changes you more.
So, and this was what Jonathan was saying. I can't remember. I mean, he said it many times, but he's saying that there is a pattern, I guess you would call that I mean, I'm going to get some of this wrong, because in language of creation, there's like 5 or 6 basic patterns,
Yes,
but let's just say heaven and earth is the hierarchy of heaven and earth, meaning matter and the integration. So would you say that what you're doing in all these, you said Vespers, you said liturgy, what are the different things?
Yeah, I was just talking about different prayers that we have. Prayer, and
each one sets the stage for the next, and all the while trying to integrate this pattern in a kind of participatory way within you, so that you see and experience reality through that pattern.
Yes, yeah.
So it's kind of a conditioning in a way. I mean, if you look at it in psychological terms, it's kind of a conditioning.
Yeah, where you are, well, it's going back to fishing, right? Like, when I get my tackle and I get my pole and I go to a place that looks like it's going to have fish, and I cast my pole, and I can do that 500 times, and I might not catch a fish. But if I don't do it, I'm not going to catch a fish. Like, if you don't go there and put your bait in the water where fish look like they're going to be, you're not going to catch a fish, right? You have to participate in reaching for God. You have to reach, and he will reach, he will flood you back. And he, like, out of his mercy, he doesn't do that very often. Right? He doesn't reveal himself that way. Every once in a while you catch a fish. Let's just you
can't will the fish onto your pole.
No, you cannot will the fish there, but you have to be there to and you stepping into prayer is that. And like I said, God is not constrained to working with you only in your prayers, right? He doesn't just talk to you while you're standing there in prayer. But what that does is it, well, for example, before we spoke, I stood up in front of the icons, I grabbed a prayer book, and I said a prayer, praying that our talk would be as good a representation of the truth as I could provide. Like, that I was offering up and saying, please guide me, please help me.
Right.
And that's and as you go to church and you pray, and then you come back into your home and you're cooking dinner for your family, but maybe you're putting a little extra care in making the food taste just the way your family likes it, and you are attending to that. You're attending to things that you didn't pay attention to before. Maybe while you're cooking, you're actually doing the dishes, whereas before you would have been watching your phone. Now you're keeping order in your space. All of these things start playing out in all of these really subtle but very beautiful ways, where you're manifesting you're manifesting the prayer life in what you do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Tying them together.
Because you don't have like a list. Okay, here are the things you have to do to be a good Christian. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like, do this, like experience the pattern, and that will guide you away from your phone and toward making a nice dinner.
Yes. Yeah. It will. yeah, this is where Jonathan is saying Christianity is not moralistic.
Yeah.
And it's not, like our priest is constantly saying, this isn't a series of check boxes
Yeah.
for your day. This is not the way to look at this. This is you participating in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And as you view your relationship with God as a relationship and you begin participating in it, it starts affecting the way you participate in your
Mm-hmm.
other relationships in your life, right? It's like that carries down,
Yeah.
and it changes it fundamentally, because you're being directed to, you're being oriented properly, right? You're not using dead reckoning anymore.
Yeah.
It's the patterns of heaven are manifesting through you rather than you just using dead reckoning in a moral landscape.
Mm-hmm.
To take up Sam Harris, right?
Yeah, that's so funny. All right, but you were saying, you were mentioning earlier that there's something about the evolutionary hierarchy, the four levels that
Oh,
just don't
yeah.
really line up for you. So tell me about that.
Well, the problem I have is I think that hierarchy, as much as he's trying to get away from modernism, as much as Pirsig is trying to get away from modernism and the Enlightenment, that hierarchy is the Enlightenment. I mean, it's like it has the intellectual, and then the
Mm-hmm.
soul. The intellectual's at the top, and intellectual patterns. I mean, obviously, if you want to build a rocket, being able to look at the material world and understand it and make predictions is very useful. But the intellectual space has nothing to say about whether you should aim the rocket at the moon or aim the rocket at a country next to you and
Mm-hmm.
put a warhead on it, right? And so for me to put rationality at the top, that's what the Soviet Union did. The Soviet Union was a physical manifestation of putting rationality as the highest good or the highest part of the hierarchy. And what that means is that if anyone doesn't agree with you, you just eliminate them because they don't see things the way you do. So because the rational and the reason is superlative over any social concern. I don't respect your rights as a human. I don't think you have any human rights if you don't see things my way, because my way is the enlightened way.
Yeah.
Right. And the other problem with that is that it becomes easy to justify any behavior as being more rational than someone else's behavior, because there's no framework for values in rationality.
Yeah.
In spite of what Sam Harris tries to say, I just don't buy Sam Harris's case for that at all.
No. I mean, he's saying that his intuition about moral good, right, is that it's a naturally emerging intuition that guides you in the direction of the good, but not understanding that good that we're guided towards is embedded in many years of, I guess, right, the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Yeah, and on top of that, if that's his view, why isn't it universal? If this moral intuition is emergent, why does he have such a problem with the moral intuition of Muslims?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
How can he argue against it? On what ground is he standing on to argue against Islam's worldview,
Mm-hmm.
while at the same time saying morality is an emergent property of
Right.
materialism?
Just being human being. Yeah.
It doesn't make any
No,
sense.
I agree with you. So how would you, I mean, just thinking about it, what would be a better hierarchy, evolutionary hierarchy? I mean, I'm assuming, of course, God's going to be, the divine is at the top.
Yeah, the way.
But would you say, I mean, because I think that this is mentioned, in Leela. In fact, they talk about this a lot, is what is the intellectual level, is the problem with the intellectual level the fact that the intellectual level is rationality and it's at the top, or is the problem that it is not dynamic enough, that it cuts itself off from the other, that it cuts itself off from the rest of the hierarchy, just so narcissistically enchanted with its own power that it negates the rest of the hierarchy, and that really, I don't know one way or another, but because I think, other people have talked about Pirsig this way, is this really the ultimate hierarchy?
Mm-hmm.
And some people will say, well, no, you've got a level of mysticism, but that mysticism, though, is dynamic quality itself. So is maybe the problem with the hierarchy is its relationship with dynamic quality, that there isn't enough God in it, so to speak.
Well, and you could make the argument that so everything in your mind is an abstraction, right? So I deal with this I work in a fabrication industry.
Uh-huh.
So I'm a data analyst, but for a fabrication company. So we build things, and we build things that have never been built before. We're a custom fabricator. We're not a manufacturer.
Yeah.
You have this thing that you need that's a one-off thing, that's
Mm-hmm.
some big hard thing made out of steel that you need us to make. That's what we do. We make it, right? Well, what you learn in that environment is that you have a drawing, and a drawing is made, it's an abstract idea put onto paper in a language that other people can understand, so that they can build out of physical things what your mental idea is that it should be, right? But so you see this, there's a perfect example of something we're building right now, where you have an engineer who's a little inexperienced with the physical properties of what they want to build. And so they said, we want you to put this huge weld, it's like an angle iron, and we want you to put this, and they're tying it to a round pipe, and we want you to just weld in and fill it in with weld. Well, what they didn't take into account is that heat is going to warp the steel. So on the drawing, they just say, oh, it's going to be perfectly flat. So that's an abstraction, and that's part of the problem with intellectualization. It's disconnected from the outcomes of reality and how reality actually functions. So when we actually go to build it, we weld it out, and they didn't say any instructions as far as, hey, allow 30 minutes between passes to reduce the heat input. They just said, weld it up. So the welder says, well, my boss is going to ask me if I got it done today, so I got to weld it up. So he welds it up, and then guess what? The angle iron goes, and then the engineer comes and goes, you guys screwed this up. Now, then the blame game starts. Right? You were supposed to read my mind about what I actually wanted. Well, I did what you said. That's the world I live in, right? And that is the weaknesses, one of the weaknesses of the intellectual being superior, right? It has to meet the road. It has to meet with the physical properties.
That's right.
The best recipe in the world doesn't taste very good. It tastes like paper until you use ingredients to follow the recipe. And even then, you can do a pretty poor job of understanding the recipe.
Yeah. So the intellectual is lost, I guess, by cutting itself off, because, I don't know what chapter it is, but he says, well, after the war, everyone was so demoralized, by this Victorian honor and glory type mentality, and it was so archaic that they were just like, screw this. And that was the beginning, after the war, modernism, and then postmodernism, and then that's all about cutting the intellectual off from the rest of the hierarchy, and assuming that they can operate on their own just because of the power and the narcissism. Whereas to be connected to the actual physical world, you've got the whole, all the social patterns, but even underneath that, you've got, let's just say, matter, the bottom two are matter and the top two are, subjective and objective. So you're cutting yourself off from the actual material world. And if you do that, you're participatory knowing of you and your body and your environment and everything is just like shoved under the rug, and it's all abstraction.
Yes, yeah. This is what Jonathan is saying about the Copernican revolution and understanding the world, and trying to say that, the sun being the center of the solar system is more true. That abstraction separates you from your experience. Yeah. All of a sudden you say, the sun doesn't actually rise, even though that's what all of my senses tell me. Yeah. That's not true. The truth is that we're spinning around it. Well, that's not your experience of it. So what that does is it undermines your personal experience and participation in the world.
That's right.
And that opened the door for, the French Revolution. That opened the door for the Communist Revolution. That opened the door for, where they're imposing this rationality as being more true than your participatory experience.
Right.
And I would say this is the one thing that the postmodernists got right, is that people are not, this is the other problem with intellectualism. People are not convinced, and their lives do not change because of facts.
That's
period.
So true.
People are not convinced by facts. It doesn't work. That is a claim of modernism that we can just put away. And Jonathan's doing a really good job of really talking about the idea that people understand, and Jordan Peterson as well, people understand the world in the structure of a narrative. And now the postmodernists and the Marxists are grabbing onto that and using it to great effect, to the horror of the rest of the world.
Yeah.
In trying to create this, they're trying to create an artificial reality using narrative.
And it lines up logically because, they can make a totally coherent argument for it. And then you could say, oh, I guess those are facts because it's coherent.
Yeah, right, exactly.
You can mistake those for facts when there are so many facts, let's just say even the most basic thing that we're seeing nowadays is this left-right divide or whatever the hell it is. and that, you're taking the exact information, you're taking this guy said this at this time, and then there are these two totally different narratives, even more, but the two main ones. So what is a fact anymore? And that's, I think, also what Jonathan is saying. Is that you cannot delineate this as a fact. Right.
Yeah, you can't delineate this as a fact, and the fact has to fit in a framework, or you can't do anything with it.
That's right.
Right. It has to be arranged in a value. Yeah, it's got to be in a value hierarchy.
Yeah.
And this is the frustrating thing of even trying to talk to some people, is that they won't even acknowledge that they have a value hierarchy.
Yeah.
They go, I'm above that. I don't do that.
Well, that's Sam Harris saying it's self-evident. That's exactly that same thing.
Right. Well, he says it's self-evident, and then it says at the same time it's an illusion. That it's a complete illusion. It's just Maya. It's just not, and it's just like, oh man.
Yeah, I know.
And he just jumps between those. I think Paul's doing a really good job of showing how.
That's right. Wasn't that what? Yeah.
He constantly switches between these worldviews, and it's no wonder that, that he's not finding peace, and that he's trapped. It's a monkey trap, right?
I think that's right.
So, because it's convenient for him, because when it's the old Mott and Bailey defense, right, where as soon as one starts taking, like you have two positions, and one is more publicly palatable, or one is more like hardline, which is his nothing matters, nothing means anything, right? It's all an illusion. And then as soon as he gets any pushback on that, he goes, okay, well, it is an illusion, but in the meantime, it's an emergent property of materialism. Right?
Yeah,
and he constantly jumps between those.
So he's saying, in the meantime, we have to deal with it though anyway. Right?
Yeah, I have to talk to I have to tell my kids, and I want them to obey me.
Right. So that is
right. Like, I'm going to be a hierarchy, but it's all an illusion.
Yeah. Yes. But in order to operate in the world, you have to be in this hierarchy, and that's just an epiphenomenon.
Yeah, exactly.
Because reality is this thing that it's all Maya, and
yeah, it's ultimately nihilistic.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's.
I think you're right.
And it's really depressing to see.
It is depressing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, to be honest, like I started running into these kind of things along the way, and some of my work at work actually kind of pushed me toward this stuff too, as far as like what I was talking to you about there's this drawing, and then you have an engineer who doesn't have a lot of experience, who can't manifest. He doesn't know how things are actually going to manifest. He only knows the drawing. And then you have the guy who looks at the drawing, who's been manifesting things out of drawings for 30 years, who goes, I can't make this the way you've drawn it. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And the engineer goes, what are you talking about? You see this clash all the time between people who write recipes and people who cook the food.
That's right.
It's the same thing, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
no, that's really interesting. That's a great point. When heaven and
yeah.
earth do not meet.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the other fun thing about my line of work is that it actually it even goes further in that once we build the thing, right? You have the guys who build the thing and they focus on building the thing. Well, then you have the inspectors who are looking at the thing to make sure that it meets the specifications and the drawing that the customer said, like the dimensions are correct, the tolerance is correct, it's within tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do is once they sign off on it, it gets a name, right? It becomes a thing. Like you have this pile of raw materials that then become sub-assemblies, that then become assemblies, that then become a thing over time. But it doesn't become a thing until you have a piece of paper by someone who signs it and
Mm-hmm.
says, here's its name.
Yeah.
And here's the funny thing is that this drives the production guys crazy, is that the inspector signing the thing, without that paper in the shipment, it doesn't exist. Like if you sent that object that you built without the paper that says it's inspected, it's a thing, here's its name. If it got to the job site, they would say, what is this? Where's the paperwork? Right? And the production guys just go bonkers over that. They hate that, right?
That's so funny.
Because it actually gives as much power to the inspectors as it
Yeah.
does to those who are building it. And both of them, there's this tension that will never die between those two camps, right? On it needs a name. It needs to, you need someone to look at it and say, this is good. Here's its name, right? We are playing this pattern out in my
Yeah,
job. That's what we do. I
that's
mean, this is Genesis, right?
yeah, no, that's an amazing analogy. I mean, I was thinking, oh, naming the animals because I was just looking at one.
Yeah, exactly. It is. It's in Genesis. You know, you have the idea that comes down, and then it comes out in its manifest form, and then you have Adam, who's, you know, the first job that Adam is given is, hey, let me show you what I got here. You name it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how we participate.
Yeah. Yeah, we participate by, and that would be sort of an analogy of that, or another way of looking at that would be where objects are objects because they are meaningful to us in a certain way. Like you know, tree is meaningful to us because, well, let's just say, you know, the things, like we're not looking at things at a micro level, and we're not looking at the whole earth. We're looking at the way things are in relationship to how we operate in the world. So that is a tree, and that is a bush, and that is because it's like that proportion. You know, we use it in a certain way. We need the wood for this. So it's about the meaning that creates the object, the quality that creates the universe.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and it's interesting you bring up tree just really quickly. It helped me understand Eastern Orthodoxy versus kind of Western science or Western worldview. And someone said, so in the West, when we want to know what a tree is, when we want to understand a tree, the first thing we do is cut it down.
Yeah.
And we count the rings, and we classify the bark, and we cut the branches off, and we look at the leaves, and we break down the leaves, and we go into the leaves and say, what are these chemicals that tie it all together, and how does it work? And we take it and we dissect it, we tear it into pieces, and at the end you're left with a bunch of parts, and they're all named, and they're structured, and they're categorized, but the tree is dead.
Yeah.
And that isn't I'm not trying to just, that's a useful way of trying to understand the world. That's a useful way of interacting with the world. And that is the classical way from Pirsig, right?
Absolutely.
Well, then you have the in the Eastern view, the way of understanding a tree is the first thing, if you want to understand a tree, you go buy a tree and you plant one in your yard, and you water it, and you put some supports around it to hold it up because it's still a little weak in the wind. And you put a fence around it so that the deer won't eat the bark, and you watch it grow, and you rake the leaves, and you look and see, oh, it's got a disease, and you talk to a tree doctor, and the tree doctor comes and helps you heal the tree. And then you build a tree house in the tree for your kids, and the kids climb in the tree, and and then the time comes where your daughter's getting married, and she loves the tree, and that she grew up in the tree house, and she wants to get married. The beauty of the story, just, I mean, sorry.
Oh, that's so lovely.
But the your daughter wants to get married under the tree.
Yeah.
And then as the tree gets old, and it might not be you, it's not going to be you, it's going to be your children and your grandchildren. The tree dies, and they love the tree, and they've grown up with the tree, and you've had 3 generations that lived in the treehouse of the tree, and they cut down the tree, and then they make the dining table for the family out of the tree. That's the Eastern way of understanding what a tree is, right? And that was the world that was opened up to me by joining the Orthodox Church, right? Rather than trying to dissect the world and killing it in the meantime, let's participate in the identity of a tree. Let's interact with the tree. Let's understand the tree on the terms of the tree from the perspective of a person. And our lives become intertwined with the tree. And then we realize that just understanding the tree from a systematic point of view is not any more valuable or less valuable than understanding the tree from a participatory point of view. They both have their uses.
Yeah.
You know? And getting obsessed with one over the other can lead to going left hand, right hand path, right? And we can reconcile those two. You don't have to throw one away, but we shouldn't dismiss the participatory experiential understanding of the tree in the interest of saying that this way of dissecting and killing the tree is the only way to understand the tree truly.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, none of these ideas are mine. I've just taken a lot of ideas, and it's like a syncretism of everything I've read that kind of comes together that helps me understand the path that I'm on. But I'm very grateful that I've been able to find that in my life, and it's brought immense, like, my family has been healed. My relationships with my family, both my close family and my extended family, has been healed. And that's a continuing process, you know. But it's definitely in a much more functioning form, you know, and it brings all of us a lot more joy than it did a couple of years ago. That's for sure. You know, so because I haven't been Orthodox very long. I've only been Orthodox for like a year and a half. So.
Well, thank you so much for sharing everything today. I mean,
you're welcome. You've been you're very good at listening, and you're very patient, and you ask very good questions, and I really have enjoyed our conversation.
Well, thank you so much. And I think that this will, you know, I think that people will resonate with your journey, you know, and this last story about the tree is absolutely a beautiful way to end.
Thank you. Thanks.
You so much. I'm glad.
Glory to God.